So in this video, I want to go over the general trends and developments in Europe in the interwar era. So in the last video, we had the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. Let's try to make the world safe for democracy. Let's try to make this the war to end all wars. And well, as we saw in the last video, again, ultimately the idealism of Wilson is not going to really come true. And so what I want to do in this video is go over the general trends and developments of the 1920s and 30s, which, again, they're a very rich era in history. I don't want to try to diminish them, but what I put on canvas for you was the slide of basically what I'm going to go over here, all the various types of instabilities in this era we're going to see pop up when we get back to the rise of Hitler and fascist Italy and the Soviet Union. So with that, let's get into and just cover briefly the big new developments. And so first big new development is the rise of mass media. So we've had mass politics, more people being engaged in the political process through campaigns and political parties in the early 1900s. We've had the rise of mass sports and entertainment, and now we have the rise of mass media such as radio and films. And so, again, if you think about 1950s, you had the television. In 1950s America, people would sit around the television together, watch the latest news, watch one of the three broadcast channels. But now in 1920s, before that, you have radio. And so families would sit around the radio and listen to an entertainment broadcast or news, or a politician speaking directly to the people, such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt's quote-unquote fireside chats in the 1930s. You also have the rise of modern films. So you had films before 1914, before World War I, but they didn't have sound. What happens in the 1920s now is that people figure out how to attach properly sound to films and images. And so over in Hollywoodland, California, you had the first quote-unquote talkie in 1927, The Jazz Singer, followed in 1928 by the debut of Mickey Mouse and Steamboat Willie. Over in Germany, you have a major film industry outside of Berlin, where you have in 1922 one of the most famous early horror films, Nosferatu, is filmed. In 1927, you have Metropolis, major early sci-fi film. And so, of course, then you have Charlie Chaplin, who was big in this era, a British comic actor. And so I'm going to put links to some of these videos below in the description if you want to check them out. But with that now, films now, a new form of mass media, mass entertainment. First type of big instability we have after the war is social and cultural instability. So remember, before World War I, Europe was progressing. We have all this new technology. Society in Europe's becoming more elaborate, all this new forms of art. It seems like in Europe, we're progressing. And ultimately in Europe, boom, all of a sudden World War I hits, and well, what now? What about all those old traditional values that are now going to be challenged by the First World War? And so across Europe, you have this sense that, what are we doing? And, what happened to progress? And so notice all these paintings here of soldiers, mutilated by the First World War. They've been changed in many ways by the First World War. They're trying to come to terms with the brutality of what they experienced on the front lines. And so you have, for example, I think some of you've probably read this in English class, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Westen nichts Neues, in the West, nothing new. Famous anti-war book written in Germany, later banned by Hitler and the Nazis because it didn't glorify war. It showed really just what a horrible experience it was. And so as I put there, a generation of young men are going to be changed by this. And well, if you've been a young man in the past 4 years, you've survived the horrors of the trenches, you've survived the machine guns and the poison gas, you've killed, and when you never thought you would kill, you're going to come back from that a changed person. And well, you have all these young men, millions of young men now, coming back from the front, taking part in mass politics, and a lot of them are accustomed to violence, and now they're going to bring violence into domestic politics. I began the previous video very quickly. I showed this painting but didn't talk about it. This is a painting in 1926 called Metropolis by Otto Dix, who was a German soldier, and well, he will paint this after the war, and kind of for me symbolizes this entire era. There's a lot of great things going on, but again, there's a lot of bad things going on. There's people really trying to come to terms with the First World War, and so if you notice in the middle, you got the jazz band, the nightlife, the people all dressed up, and the dancers. Where on the left and the right, you see these other panels where you have these mutilated war veterans. They've lost their limbs. You see the guy on the left there laying on the street. And well, they're either approaching or being passed over by these prostitutes in the streets of Berlin or the metropolis. And so, again, it's a really big shaken up world where ideas of what it means to be man and woman really begin to change in this era. Again, it's in this era that more women now get the right to vote in the US, Great Britain, etc. And so with that, we're going to be carrying this sort of politics and these sort of this shaking up of values into this new era. We also have international instability, and I went over this a lot with the previous video. Again, a lot of nationalists are not happy with the Paris Peace Conference. National self-determination, nation-states sound great in theory, but in practice, it's really hard to work. And if you're Italians, you feel like, the Italians have been cheated from what you were promised. If you are, let's say, Hungary, you're furious at the Treaty of Trianon. And again, what about those minorities of, let's say, Hungarians? The Hungarians of Transylvania over here used to be the majority, dominant, and now they're the minority in a larger Romanian state. And so, again, there are a lot of issues with these national minorities within regions, countries. You also have these border disputes over, who should get certain regions. I actually never knew until I looked it up the other day, but Poland and Czechoslovakia actually, right after the war, had a brief border conflict over where the borders of their countries should be drawn. And so, this is major stuff happening. And of course, the big concern is the spread of communism. And so the international community will eventually recognize the new communist government of Russia, established by the Bolsheviks and Lenin. But again, remember what the communists are all about. Communists are about spreading the worldwide proletarian revolution. Workers of the world unite. And so a lot of Western countries and democracies, and we'll get into other governments in a bit, are really worried about the spread of communism. Because again, in Berlin, in Paris, in Vienna, in the United States, you have these communist governments that want to now continue the workers' revolution. And so again, we've had some workers' revolutions, some communist revolutions in Berlin and Hungary be put down, for example. And the spread of Bolshevism was a major concern of people at the Paris Peace Conference. So notice the cartoon here I just found today. A new subject comes up, the peace table, and there's Bolshevism, like this little creature busting through the table. And then here you have a cartoon from the United States titled "Put Them Out and Keep Them Out," where you have the Reds, here are these communists with the Bolshevism knife coming up from under the flag, bringing anarchy. So here, a poster I'll come back to later with Germany's ideal future under the rule of the Bolsheviks. And so again, nobody wants, if you're a liberal, bourgeois, or conservative, property owner, and you don't want the communist government of Russia to promote communist revolutions in other countries. And so the U.S. and others will be highly suspicious of communist Russia. And well, into this picture, we're also going to add economic instability. And so remember, in our total war, we had economies geared toward winning the war effort at all costs. And now, all of a sudden, with the war over, who needs to be making this many guns anymore? We need to take that factory and turn it back into making, toilet paper or hand sanitizer or toys, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden now, this just economic dislocation causes, ripple effect throughout the economy. And so immediately after the war, there's unemployment, there's inflation. I've explained inflation a bajillion times. And you're going to have eventually, though, in the 1920s, generally things will pick up. The roaring 20s, or return to prosperity and hope. Economies will now turn around. Germany, as I have there, was having difficulties paying the war reparations. The German economy was awful. And, how are we going to pay back billions of dollars now to the Western allies? And the U.S. will create this scheme to where sort of the U.S. will lend money to Germany so Germany can pay back Britain and France. And then in the 1930s, boom, the Great Depression hits. And now from the United States comes this worldwide economic downturn with massive unemployment, 30% unemployment. And again, everybody's worried. Again, think about, unfortunately, what's happening right now. Everybody's worried about their economic future. What's going to happen to our livelihoods? And so there's a lot of economic anxiety, especially in the 1930s. Here I have a bunch of pictures actually from Germany. A soup kitchen there on the right. Again, people to help them deliver a hot meal. You got guys standing around the bottom right looking for work. A woman here just picking up what she can from the streets. This woman here, her little sign says, "Hallo, ich suche Arbeit." Hello, I'm looking for work, and then kind of lists her qualifications. This barbershop's offering discounts to people who are unemployed. Again, remember, a lot of these wounded war veterans that can't find employment either. And with the collapse of the economic system, a lot of people, as in these photos here, are running off to the bank to try to get their savings out, to get their cash before it disappears. People running to stores to try to get supplies and food. And so, again, it's a very awful economic time. I'm not going to go into the roots of it. You're going to get into this more in American history. It's kind of complicated with the stock market crash, how that happens. I'm going to include a clip below in the description about how the stock market works if you're interested. But again, the Great Depression begins in the US, it's going to impact Europe too in a big way. And so I also will put down in the course description below sort of song of the day here. I decided I'm going to put just some Great Depression era music, but I like On the Sunny Side of the Street. As the clip you'll see, the singer will mention how it was a song written about, in dark times to lift people up. And well, I've been listening to this song a lot the past several weeks. And so with that, I hope you enjoy On the Sunny Side of the Street. But let's turn now to political instability. And so, okay, what are our governments now going to do about this huge economic crisis called the Great Depression? And well, we have our liberal democracies, and they either were, or at least seem to be, unable to deal with the crisis. How do we solve this massive economic downturn? Well, look at our map of France in the bottom left. It's showing here a map of all the political parties and which regions voted, the majority of people voted for a particular party. So notice how colorful it is. You have all sorts of political ideologies and political parties, and now notice by 1928 here, for example, the Chamber of Deputies, the House of Commons or the House of Representatives. No one party has a majority in the legislature. No one party has 51% of members, where if the whole party stays together, they can push through their, reform ideas. Well, what's going to happen in these liberal democracies, what happens still today in places in Europe that have multi-party liberal democracies, is these parties need to work together, make compromises, and form some sort of coalition to push through a reform agenda. And well, if all these different parties can't agree on reforms to deal with the Great Depression, it's going to look like democracy is unable to handle these big crises. Notice and I put here, the major parties of Germany in the interwar era we'll come back to in a later video. Again, you have the largest party, the SPD, I went over before, the Social Democrats, largest party by World War I. They're the ones who established a republic after the First World War, but again, they don't have a majority of delegates in the German Reichstag, the lower house. And so they need to try to coordinate with other parties, and that's going to be really difficult. And so what people now look in the era and say is, well, look, we need a solution. We need a solution now, and if that means we need to break through the troublesome aspects of democracy, so be it, because we need a radical solution, and we need a big solution now, and well, if democracy needs to suffer for it, so be it. And so, again, a lot of instability here as democracies are unwilling in one way or another, or unable, I should say, to deal with the Great Depression. And so we've had still, again, increasing class and ideological tensions. Again, there's still that middle class fear of communism. We've had class and ideological tensions for a long time. But what I want to stress now is our political spectrum. And I probably dropped the phrase here or there, the right wing or the left wing. And now definitely know the right wing versus the left wing. And so people are scared of communism, but that's only one ideology in the greater political spectrum. And so we've built this up throughout the course of the 19th century. We've had liberalism and conservatism coming out of the French Revolution in the early 19th century. We then added socialism, which is to the left. And then we've added communism, a more extreme form of socialism. We've also going to add very soon an extreme form of conservatism called fascism. And so thus, when I refer to the left wing and right wing, I'm referring to these ends of the political spectrum. And liberalism here is in the middle. And so remember, I mentioned a long time ago the French Revolution, when the radical members, the extreme people who wanted more change in the National Convention sat down in 1792. The ones that wanted more change sat on the left. Those who wanted to keep things the same sat more on the right, and thus our terminology is born. Now, I'm not a fan of really how this breaks down. We'll get into fascism versus communism in the next video, but definitely know what left wing and right wing are. We still use these terms today, and I'm still going to use them because they're especially big in the interwar era. Because not only will these wings be fighting in the halls of politics and in legislatures and assemblies, but literally these groups will often be fighting in the streets. You won't just have a political party, but what's often going to happen is you're going to have a political party that has an armed gang, that has a militant wing. And so imagine if today you had the Democrats and Republicans with their own sort of, say Democratic League or, the Republican militia, and they'll go out in the streets and they'll march around to show how tough the party is, to show how tough their ideology and their movement is. And sometimes these gangs, basically, these political gangs, would fight each other in the streets. And so actually in Austria, you have a moment where you actually have a brief civil war between the Socialist Republican Protection League, the Schutzbund, versus the conservative nationalist Homeland Protection, the Heimwehr. And so these groups will actually battle in the streets of Vienna. Same things that happen in Germany and other countries too. You have these militant gangs tied to political parties or political ideologies. And what I also want to stress here is, and I put this also in this other page, hopefully you downloaded this political spectrum, what I want to do is make sure you understand that socialists and communists are not the same things. And so remember, socialism's been developing for a long time, ever since the Industrial Revolution. We had utopian socialism. How do we deal with the negative consequences of industrialization? Well, let's form self-sufficient communes. Well, those fail. And after 1848, Marx's view of socialism takes off, where he calls for a proletarian revolution. It's inevitable. But again, as I stressed before, by 1900, it looks to a lot of people, to a lot of socialists, that Marx's inevitable revolution is not going to come true. A lot of things Marx said would come true are not coming true. So what do we do? How do we achieve socialist goals? Well, you'll still have committed Marxists. So notice there I put Marxists. Again, who are pro-revolution. We want to overthrow the political system, have the dictatorship of the proletariat, have the workers seize the means of production. And a good example of those guys so far have been the Bolsheviks of Russia. Now in the interwar era, we're going to call them communists because as they see it, they're achieving the Marxist dream, which is a classless society, which is communism. But you have, though, however, in many places in Europe, you have the pro-reform group, again, who say, look, the workers' rights and, we need to take on the capitalists, but we're not looking to overthrow the system, the political system. We want to work within it. So let's form a social democratic party, for example, in Germany, and try to gain reforms through universal suffrage and political parties and voting to gain reforms for workers. And so they're revisionists. And those revisionists we're calling now socialists. So socialists here and communists, they may be on the left wing of the spectrum, but oftentimes socialists and communists hate one another. Communists in the interwar era think the socialists have betrayed the true revolution. They're sellouts to the bourgeois capitalists. A lot of socialists see the communists as dangerous revolutionaries who are looking to upset and overthrow their efforts to make life better for workers. Again, on the right wing of the political spectrum, fascism and conservatism don't get along always either. Conservatives see fascists as too extreme and too brutal and, it's just awful. And fascists see conservatives as weak. And so, again, even though these wings here are these wings, and they will cooperate sometimes, again, they don't all agree, these ideologies. And so when it comes to political instability, the last big thing here is, in Central and Eastern Europe, we're going to establish these post-war liberal democracies, huzzah, but by 1939, they're going to collapse given all the instabilities we've gone over. And so again, Wilson wanted to make the world safe for democracy. By 1939, it doesn't look very good any longer. And so I have for you also on Canvas the types of government interwar Europe. And again, I just put this all here because you should know this. You should be. We established these sort of roads back in the early 19th century, and we're just continuing on the same roads. That we're going to add something new. And so we have our liberal democracies, our republics, our liberal constitutional monarchies, which by 1939 are largely located in Western Europe. France still has the Third Republic we established in 1871. Great Britain has a liberal constitutional monarchy, which now after World War I has given all males the right to vote and all women. You have the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands have constitutional monarchies, liberal Scandinavian countries, and also in the East, however, in Central and Eastern Europe, you have Czechoslovakia, the one last liberal democratic holdout in Central and Eastern Europe. But remember, what is liberalism about? Individual rights, equality before the law, right to a fair trial. Democracy, again, constitutions, limited governments, assemblies, fair elections, multiple political parties, universal suffrage, or simply universal male suffrage. Remember, France at the moment is not going to grant women the right to vote in France till after World War II. So, again, none of that under the liberal democracies column should seem new, but we're just calling it now altogether a liberal democracy. What also shouldn't seem too new is what we're going to call now authoritarian states. So remember, we had conservatism, we had autocracies. We're still going to have those in the interwar period. Conservative constitutional monarchies, autocracies, military dictatorships located in Central and Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, the Balkan countries especially. So remember, with conservatism, we want to try to maintain the traditional social hierarchy. Again, we're not really going to prize individual rights. If we need to curtail individual rights and clamp down on things, then so be it. And again, now we have authoritarianism, which again isn't anything new in itself. We're just creating this new term. Power in the hands of one person. And we've seen this before. In the interwar Europe, you have kings like Alexander I of Yugoslavia and Carol II of Romania, who basically rule as autocrats. You have prime ministers like Engelbert Dollfuss, awesome name, of Austria, and Metaxas of Greece, basically ruling with complete power as prime ministers. You have Marshal Pilsudski take over Poland, a general. You have Admiral Horthy, who's really the leader of Hungary. Complicated situation in Hungary, though. But again, he ultimately has control. And so with authoritarianism, again, the government's not limited by laws. There may be one legal political party or none at all. And so again, think back to our conservative monarchies pre-1848, even pre-World War I. We're kind of just keeping up that tradition. We're calling it authoritarianism. So again, these two columns should really not be new. But now we add the new part. Totalitarian states are similar to authoritarian states, but we're kind of taking that conservative tradition and revving it up. And so we have our classic totalitarian states, Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, and Fascist Italy. And I'll get into all three later, but I'm going to go over some aspects of them now. So this new term here, totalitarianism, it's kind of a complicated political concept and people debate it, but I'm going to define it as an extreme form of authoritarianism. We're taking these authoritarian ideas and we're just really revving them up. And so it's the attempt for government now to control all aspects of public and private life, economic, social, political, cultural, etc. So notice it's not that the government's actually going to achieve total control, but these governments are going to try to achieve total control over as much as they possibly can. And well, how do we achieve this? Well, there's below is our tools of totalitarianism. And I'm going to use Hitler and Germany and Stalin and Soviet Union as sort of the big examples here, because they are really big examples of totalitarian states. Sorry, Mussolini. Let's start with secret police. They're going to be used in a much more extensive way. Secret police in plain clothes, engaging in what I'm calling here police terror. So, today if a police officer wants to search your house, he needs a warrant. And well, in a totalitarian state, again, the police represent the government. The government's trying to maintain total control. And so, no, the police can just barge on in. You don't have any rights in a totalitarian system. And so in Germany, famously, you have what's called the Gestapo, the Geheime Staatspolizei. That's its abbreviation, Gestapo, the secret state police. Again, that could just, in plain clothes, round up people. Again, these are the guys you often see in the Indiana Jones movies and World War II movies, the Gestapo. In the Soviet Union, you have the NKVD for now, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. In other words, these are the agents who go around and just mass murder whoever the government wants mass murdered, or arrest large groups of people that the government wants to arrest. You also have indoctrination, especially through education. So again, we do education today through civics. We're trying to teach people how to be good citizens of a liberal democracy. And what these totalitarian governments now will tap into is, okay, well, let's just use education to teach people how to worship the government, worship the one leader of our totalitarian states. And so on the left there, you see, Nazi-era classrooms with the swastika, the twisted cross there, this Nazi symbol, the painting or portrait of Hitler. I showed you before my Nazi-era school atlas, again, showing the old view of history of civilization coming from Mesopotamian Egypt versus the new vision of history, quote-unquote fact-based, with civilization coming from the Germans. Again, that is a type of indoctrination through education, trying to get people to accept false facts in order to promote their political ends. And then here is a Soviet classroom with Stalin, with Lenin. Again, there's the kid sitting there with a bust of Lenin. So again, indoctrination education is huge. You also have youth groups, and so in Germany, famously, you have the Hitler Youth, the Hitlerjugend. You also have a group for girls, the League of German Girls. Think of it like the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts are designed to promote, American patriotism and skills. That's basically what the totalitarian states are doing. They're building these same youth groups, but they're engaging in way more political indoctrination. Offiziere von morgen, officers of tomorrow. Youth here serve the Führer, they serve Hitler. And so again, you're going to learn how to wrestle and, kind of go out in the woods and take care of yourself. You're going to learn how to fire a gun. But this is all to basically get people to embrace the Nazi Party and Hitler and to train them for a future war. In the Soviet Union, you have something similar. You have the Pioneers for young boys and young girls, and then you have the Komischol, which was the youth group for teenagers. You also have censorship. So in Nazi Germany, you're going to have a newspaper called the Völkischer Beobachter, the National Observer. In Soviet Union, famously, you have a newspaper called Pravda, Truth, and the irony there being that it's telling the government's perspectives or lies, yet it's called truth. And so you have all types of censorship. You have only one newspaper allowed, or the government controls the newspapers. You also have things in Nazi Germany like book burnings. And so, of course, Nazis, as I'll get to in the next video, or fascists in general, hate the communists. And so, of course, we're going to, have these celebrations where we bring out the youth and we throw out all these books and we burn them because they're against our, country, against our ideology. So they burned the Communist Manifesto. I mentioned the book a minute ago, All Quiet on the Western Front. That's a book that will be banned and burned in these book burnings because, again, it basically criticizes war. It doesn't glorify war, which is what the Nazis want. And so when you go to Berlin today, there's a square here in the center of Berlin called Babelplatz. And if you go towards the middle, you'll see this memorial here, these empty shelves, because the National Library is just over here on the right. And in 1933, what Nazi Party officials did was they led a book burning here in the center of the square to burn all the books that went against the ideas that went against their ideology. So Nazi book burning is a form of censorship. If you're a child in a classroom, hey student, did you see this book in your parents' house? And your child can get you in trouble. Notice these photographs here, censorship through basically early Photoshop. Here you have Nikolai Yezhov, the former head of the NKVD, the terror police. And famously this photograph here, there he is standing next to Stalin, but eventually he's going to be killed himself in what we're going to call later the Great Purges. And so after he's killed, his memory is basically wiped from photographs. Stalin turned against him, Stalin had him killed, and now Stalin has him removed from photographs. Notice the photograph here. There's Stalin with three of his, his associates, and now eventually there's just the picture of Stalin there. And so, again, censoring potential opponents too. I played for you before the 1812 Overture, and I mentioned how at one point God Save the Tsar, the old Russian anthem, is part of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. And if the communists, the Bolsheviks, fought against the Tsar and fought against monarchies, they don't like monarchs, we don't want to keep this song in the 1812 Overture. And so I'm going to put links to this below if you want to check it out. But what I'm going to put is the original version of 1812 Overture, the finale, and then the Soviet version, because what the Soviet version does is they take out the God Save the Tsar melody and they place in this other Russian patriotic anthem. And so, again, we don't want to honor the Tsar even through the 1812 Overture. So, again, that's a form of censorship. Lastly, you have censoring ideas, but then you also have propagating or promoting your own twisted ideas. And so here you have all of these images, famously a Hitler poster, Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one people, one nation, one empire, one government, one leader. So again, notice what totalitarian states I put up there. Again, we have a one party, one leader dictatorship. And the dictator, the leader will see us through and represent the people, whether it's the nation or, in the case of Stalin, the working class. And so long live our teacher, our father, our leader, comrade Stalin. Stalin takes care of each of us from the Kremlin. How kind. Stalin's kindness illuminates the future of our children. Long live Germany. And there's Hitler representing the nation, the folk. Here, Hitler builds up, so help buy buying German goods. And so again, all these sort of propaganda posters. You also have propaganda films. You have all sorts of rallies in a totalitarian state. And so famously in Nazi Germany, you have Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Public Engagement and Propaganda. And his job was to promote Nazi ideology in various ways. And so think about, for example, all these parades, again, people parading through the streets, showing the strengths of the National Socialist Nazi movement, showing the strength of Germany. If you remember if you ever seen Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, there's a march and a book burning. And that's the stuff that Goebbels is putting on. The Nazi Party would have their own rallies every year, and the annual rallies would take place in Nuremberg, Germany, an old medieval center of Germany, major medieval town. Notice the rallies here, masses of people showing the strength here, especially of German women, but the unity of the Nazi Party, the strength of the Nazi Party, etc. And in the 1934 Nazi Party rallies, the minister there, Goebbels, hired a female director named Leni Riefenstahl to film the rallies and to promote through the new medium of film the Nazi Party and Hitler. And so in 1934, Leni Riefenstahl will engage in some kind of new techniques. It's kind of a big film in the history of filmmaking, but in 1934, she'll come out with the most famous propaganda film, Triumph of the Will, Triumph des Willens in German. And it'll show in the beginning, and I'm going to put a link to it below if you want to check it out. Remember, it's propaganda. It's promoting Nazi ideas. But notice, I put the GIF here. You have a plane flying across Nuremberg, and basically Hitler's descending from the clouds while the Germans there march beneath all the Nazi Party members. And it's promoting a certain idea. Today, when you go to Nuremberg, you can actually go to the Nazi Party rally grounds where these rallies took place. It's changed from what it looked like back in the 1930s. I have the gif there of the swastika being blown up because U.S. soldiers will blow it up when they capture Nuremberg at the end of the war. But you can go there today, and it's kind of weird. I didn't know how to pose when I took a photo there. But again, it's kind of weird saying the spot where so much hate was spewed by Hitler and his minions. And so today there's concerts and other stuff that happens here, but you can actually check out the rally grounds today. And there's our political landscape: liberal democracies in the West, authoritarian states in the central and eastern parts of Europe, and then our totalitarian states: Nazi Germany, Soviet Union, and fascist Italy, with totalitarian states based on authoritarianism, but really revving up their attempted control over all aspects of society. And so in the next video, what I'll do is I'll get into fascism and communism and a little bit about the specific experiences of the Soviet Union and fascist Italy.